Bronius Cikotas, for almost 2 decades, was responsible for United States Air Force ground-based and missile EMP test assessment and hardening programs. So that means for 20 years, scientist Bronius Cikotas was the man chiefly in charge of protecting our strategic forces from EMP effects. He also served as a senior scientist for the Defense Information Systems Agency, protecting critical command and control networks from EMP. Indeed, Bron invented the Ground Wave Emergency Network, GWEN, and achieved the moniker the father of GWEN, because this was the chief means by which we were to protect our strategic command and control that was vital to the survivability from EMP of our strategic nuclear deterrent. After the Cold War, Bron has continued to study EMP, in addition looking at great geomagnetic storms and the threat that they could pose to our people and population, and has done papers examining the effects that these could have on the civilian population and individuals.
I'm going to talk about the societal impacts from what I call an extreme geomagnetic storm. It is similar to EMP. There's some advantage to it in terms of arguing for it, in that people will say, well, nobody's going to do EMP, attack us with an EMP attack. They can't make that same statement about natural events. I'm going to talk about the effects of geomagnetic storms. I'll talk about infrastructure interdependencies, which is the major thing that's going to bring our infrastructure down. Infrastructure vulnerabilities, I'll pick some of the critical infrastructures that support sustainment of life. I'll talk about the societal consequences, particularly in the densely populated cities. That's where the situation is going to be the worst. I'll deal with options to deal with the threat on a personal or a small community basis, and I'll make recommendations with regard to the national issues and what needs to be done. An extreme geomagnetic storm has a high probability of resulting in a major shutdown of the U.S. and Canadian power grids. In the likely event of an occurrence of an extreme geomagnetic storm, the power grid recovery process will be very complex and extremely lengthy, ranging from weeks, months, to years, or 10 years or longer. The extended recovery period will in turn lead to a shutdown of virtually all industries, commerce, and day-to-day business operations, will put our society at risk of survival, and things will happen very quickly. Overall power restoration will very likely take years due to the significant amount of damage. Comprehensive economic recovery may in fact take a decade or longer. The situation addressed here is unprecedented in modern society, and it is very likely to throw our quality of life back into the 19th century, as has been discussed, the fact that our infrastructures will not be working. However, the people in the previous century were much better off. They lived a much simpler life, and they had the resources to continue to produce food and had access to food and water, which we're not going to have if we lose our infrastructures on which we're dependent for that. There is a common assumption that our infrastructures are so robust that nothing short of a nuclear war is going to bring them down. High-altitude EMP and a geomagnetic storm can do it. These are the infrastructures that are vulnerable in case of a geomagnetic storm. Power is the primary thing that drives the other infrastructures and makes them collapse. If we look at water, typically a person can survive without water for about 3 days. A person needs about a gallon of water per day to survive. The New York City area needs about 17 million gallons of potable water per day to keep its population alive. With water processing failing, in many cases with pumps failing, it's going to be a major problem, and water will be the major item for survival initially. There will be other things that will come in later on. But we need water, and we need water continuously, and we need it processed or at least potable. As far as food is concerned, cities typically have a 3 to 5 day supply of food. Some people have months and longer. But basically, once the supermarkets empty out and people will search for restaurants and other places to getting accessible food, there'll be looting, there'll be insurrections, there'll be fighting for the limited resources that are available. It'll be not a safe place to be in the city. One of our worst problems will be the issue of sanitation. Sewage does not run without water. Toilets will get clogged up. They will seep from the upper floors to the lower floors and will start coming up out of the toilets into the residential areas to the point where people will eventually have to leave those areas and find another place to go. The problem with that, and also it'll gather in the low parts of the city as it accumulates. Los Angeles, for example, pumps their sewage out of the city, pumps it uphill to the processing plants. Processing plants won't be working, but basically we will have sewage everywhere in the highly densely populated areas, and there will be no way to deal with it. Initially, the transportation will be available, cars will be available. As they start running out of gas, it'll get clogged out. If this happens during the night, they will not go to work. They'll wait for the power to come back on. If it happens during the day, you saw what happened during the last blackout. People walked home in many cases. Many people, particularly those that use public transportation, trains, electric trains, and so on, and live far away from work, will never make it back home. They'll die probably after a short period of time wherever they happen to be, unless there's some miracle happens and they find a place that they can survive. Basically, there will be a fight for resources. Everybody will try to conserve, and anarchy will set in a fairly short order. Gangs will roam around looking for food, breaking into houses, breaking into other facilities to try to get access to food or any water that's available. Medical and health services. These are the people that will get hurt first. There are typically between 25 and 30 million people that need medication or medical attention on a regular basis. 20 million of them are diabetics that need medication to continue to live. They are basically going to be a lost part of the population. Just imagine that many people dying without anybody else dying in the process, and the bodies dropping wherever they happen to be. And you're living in the surrounding area. It's really an untenable situation. Initially, communications will be available, but as happened during 9/11, you won't be able to get access to it because everybody else will be trying to do that. The regular telephone systems, when they get into an emergency situation like this, they start delaying the dial tone. So if you pick up a phone, you may not get a dial tone for half an hour. But who's waiting for half an hour? You put it down, you pick it up later, you're starting the half hour over again. If you put your phone on a speakerphone, well, I don't know if speakerphones will work without power, that's another thing. But basically, if you want to get a dial tone, you got to stay on there for half an hour longer, then you might be able to get the call through. That's the process they use to not overwhelm the system. Considering the threats and consequences we're facing, I believe that the burden, cost, and urgency of protecting our critical infrastructures, public and private, to a large extent will fall on the government. It is almost too big an issue to handle by the power grid or other critical infrastructures. So the government will need to find a way to work with the private sector to address that. What are the options? What can we do personally about it? Plan, prepare ahead of time. It's not enough to plan. It's not enough to prepare, have things around your house that you can work with. You need to be ready to move if something like this happens. Organize with family, friends, neighbors, community to include local authorities unless you are prepared and can isolate yourself. It is risky doing it on your own. There'll be roaming gangs and other things that will try to find resources and take them away from you. Potable water, or means to make it safe for drinking, is the key to your survival. You got to find a way to do that. Have supplies of salt on hand to preserve perishable food that you may have in the freezer or the refrigerator. If you have a place outside the city and have fuel, pack up and try to reach it. Do not wait for panic to set in. In most cases, your chances of survival, even with limited resources outside the city, are likely to be better. If you're short on food, know where there are major non-perishable food suppliers outside the city by swinging by to replenish your supplies. They will provide food in limited quantities to people that come by those places. But it is not time to go onto the internet and try to find those places after you've lost power. Talk to your local authorities about having community plans for emergency power, food, fuel, a way to process water and distribute it. Recommendations: we need to push for the continuation of the U.S. EMP Commission and expand its charter to include geomagnetic storm threats, educate the public about the seriousness of the situation, harden the power grid and other critical infrastructures, prioritize in the process, plan to reallocate resources so that you can meet the needs of the population. You don't find themselves in an untenable situation, no food, no water, and no way to survive. Basically, if you look at the situation, we could lose many tens of millions of people in months, and potentially it could reach 100 million people unless we prepare. It's not enough to harden the power grid. It's important to address these other issues also. Thank you.